Hi, welcome to Week in Review, where we look at some of the news and the headlines. I'm joined this week by a powerful panel. We have the best religion reporter in Oklahoma, Carla Hinton's with us, one of the finest watchdog reporters in Oklahoma, Nolan Clay. From sports, we have Ryan Sharp, and my old friend from business, Don Mecoy. A lot of stuff going on this week. Carla, let's start with you. Big day tomorrow for for Oklahoma City area Catholics. And not just area Catholics, but Oklahoma City in general. What's going on tomorrow?
Okay, the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, is going to host the beatification ceremony for the Reverend Stanley Rother. He's an Okarche native who was killed in Guatemala while serving the church. He was killed by unknown assailants, and the church, the Universal Church, declared him a martyr because they believe he died due to hatred of the faith. And so that's going on. There'll be thousands of Catholic faithful here, but not only Catholic faithful, there'll be people of faith here to witness this historic occasion. He is the first U.S.-born male and the first U.S. priest designated as a martyr by the Pope. And
so Saturday at the Cox Center, there will be a mass.
Right.
The beatification,
yes,
essentially. And tell us a little bit about what happens there. And this is essentially the next step on the road to sainthood, right?
That's right. That's right. This means that he's one step closer to being a Roman Catholic saint. And that's obviously a very big deal and a very historic for someone from Oklahoma. This is not known to be a Catholic state. We're typically Protestant here in Oklahoma. But anyway, he will be just one step closer. He will need to have a miracle performed due to his intercession, and he would be a saint. This is expected to take a couple of years because the Catholic Church takes this very seriously. They will rigorously examine this particular part of the sainthood process to make sure that a miracle was indeed performed. Typically, it would be a healing. That's what the Archbishop told me. Typically, it would be a healing of some nature. Those can be documented by medical scientists.
Mm-hmm. And tomorrow there'll be quite a bit of pageantry.
Yes.
It starts with a march that begins on the church on the south side at 7 in the morning.
Right, St. James.
And they'll be marching from there all the way downtown to the Cox Center,
yes,
where the Mass will be held at 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock, 10 a.m.
Okay. And we'll have coverage all day tomorrow, live on News OK. We'll have reporters on the scene. Carla will be obviously inside. It should be something to behold. We're really excited for that. Nolan, let's talk about a trial this week on a particularly heinous case that really shocked the community here. The Alton Nolen case, the man charged with beheading a worker at a Moore food facility. Jury selection this week, and the trial got underway. What's happened so far?
Jury selection was actually completed last week, and they started opening statements, and they put on more than 20 witnesses the prosecution has. And you know what? People think of murder trials, and they think of it like a mystery novel, that it's always a whodunit. But this isn't a whodunit. I mean, he was caught, shot at the plant. He confessed. Here's one transcript of his confession to the police and the FBI. The question at this trial is twofold. One, his defense attorneys are saying he is not guilty by reason of insanity, that he has a mental illness, that he thinks he's a Muslim and has twisted his reading of the Quran to believe that he was 100% right to try to behead the one woman and try to behead another because, as he told the FBI and more police, he felt oppressed by them. So the jury is being tasked not to decide whether he did it, but to decide whether he was insane. Now, if they find him insane, he won't go to prison. Instead, he'll go to the state mental facility in Veneta, where he'll be held possibly for the rest of his life. If they find him guilty and reject this defense, then there's a second stage, and prosecutors are asking for the death penalty. And his defense attorneys will fight that because of his mental issues that they say exist. So we'll see how it comes out. It's going to be a couple of weeks. Prosecution rested Wednesday, and the defense starts on Monday with experts, and it'll take probably next week till we have a verdict if the juries can agree.
And we've had, for the first time, we're hearing from some of the people who were there that day as to what they encountered, and some of the victims are sort of for the first time sharing their stories. And some of the testimony has just been absolutely chilling in terms of what they were confronted with that day. Talk a little bit about some of the testimony and some of the things that the women described as happening that day.
Well, it was the most gripping moment was when the woman who survived, who had complained about remarks he'd made on a line, where basically an assembly line, a conveyor belt, and they're making bruschetta, and some of the ladies didn't think he was stirring it enough to keep the oil and all mixed up, and as they were dipping it into the jars and weighing it, and there was a little bit of an argument, and the one lady called him an immature brat, and he made a statement, which he admits to, that I beat on Caucasians. So she reports him. He gets suspended, and he goes home to his apartment, gets a knife, and comes back, and his target was going to be his supervisor, but he can't find his supervisor. So he goes and beheads the one woman, and we hear horrific testimony about how he kept going back to her, and as people tried to come in and fight him, kicked him in the head, and he finally accomplished what he was doing. And then he sees the second lady, her name's Tracy Johnson, and attacks her, and he's screaming the Arabic phrase, "God is great," as he's doing it, and he's sawing on her neck. She describes it as he was going at her like he was cutting a piece of meat. At that point, 3 or 4 or 5 men have come in. One of them is the company's operating officer at the time, and he's a reserve Oklahoma County Sheriff's deputy, and he has an AR-15 rifle, and he describes, yelling at the guy, and Nolen charging at him with the knife, and he shoots 3 times, and finally the guy stops and leans against the wall and slides down, and the lady who had complained about him is bleeding and has injuries to actually the right side of her neck, and but when she came into court, it was the first time she'd been in a court setting with the defendant, because she didn't testify at the preliminary hearing, and she's clearly scared. The prosecutor, Susan Caswell, held her hand as she walked through the little swinging gate and up to the witness stand, which was a long way away from the defendant, but still, she kept looking over at him, and at one point she said, "This is rough, sorry, this is rough," and she described what happened to her, and the whole time, this defendant, who's not cooperating with his defense attorneys, because he wants the death penalty, or he said he did, and he's sitting over there with his fingers in his ears, his head down. Sometimes he does this, where he gets his, he doesn't have glasses on, where he gets his fingers and over his eyes too, and he nods a little bit, and sometimes, strangely, he has short sleeves and orange gel clothes on, and he takes his hands out of his sleeves and sticks them up through the hole in the top, and does it like this, and it's a very odd sight. The very first day I was there for the opening statements, he had Kleenex. I guess his nose was running, and he had stuffed them up each nostril, and they were sticking out. It's a strange setting.
It's a case that's just been shocking from the instant it began, and it continues to shock people. So he's done an outstanding job of covering it. Follow Nolen on Twitter. He provides live updates throughout the day on what's happening in the courtroom. It's a great way to follow that story. Of course, then you can pick up the paper and read all of our coverage every day on that case. Let's try and switch to something a little lighter. Ryan, let's talk about Big 12 football.
Both schools back in action this week. Oklahoma State hosts TCU in a top 20 matchup, one of the top matchups in the country. We had two undefeated teams. Oklahoma State ranked number 6, TCU in the 14, 15, 16 range, depending on which poll you're looking at. Two really good teams. Obviously, two of the top 3 teams in the conference. It should be a pretty competitive game. It usually is. I think Oklahoma State's favored by 12 or so. They're at home, so that's reasonable. Then Oklahoma travels to Baylor.
Then there's the other game.
Yeah, and it's, I was joking with somebody the other day, this is the Baylor of old. This is the Baylor of the early 2000s and the 90s.
The one we like.
Yeah, they're terrible. And you've got to understand why that they're so bad. They lost so many recruits over the past couple of years because of the scandal. They lost a lot of players that were on their roster, a lot of their top flight players. So this is not the same group of guys that were ranked in the top 5 a couple of times, that have been ranked in the top 10 pretty consistently for the past 4 or 5 years. This is a team that's lost to some lower level D1 teams over the past 3 weeks. So that game should turn out about as we'd expect. You've got the number 2 ranked team in Oklahoma. And again, Baylor has not won a game and hasn't really been close, even against some pretty inferior opponents. So should be a great weekend. There's some other national games of interest too, but Oklahoma State and TCU is probably near the top of that list.
Don, I know you're outraged about that K-State game call, but
yeah,
we won't.
But they lost, right?
They did.
Vanderbilt.
They did.
Yeah. Okay. I was just trying to remember. It's 14-7.
It's 14-7.
Okay.
We'll talk more about that next week.
I'm sure we will.
We have the week off, if you guys were wondering. So, okay. Don, let's talk about, there's also big news on the basketball front. Down in Norman, there's a lot of stuff going on that could change the look of that city a little bit.
Yeah, we had a story that we do a lot on business where we talk about new developments and new plans. And Norman, there's a huge development that was unveiled, and it includes an arena, a new arena for the OU basketball team. And we heard Barry Trammell from Sports talk to Joe Castiglione, who said, "Yeah, we're kind of on board with this. If this happens, we probably would be willing to move from Lloyd Noble to this new arena." But this is such a big development, and it's not clear right now where all the financing is going to come from. One city official in Norman estimated it's going to cost nearly $500 million, because this involves not just an arena, it involves housing, it involves offices, it involves a hotel, it involves retail, a senior center.
Where does this sort of sit in Norman?
This is along I-35 from Tecumseh all the way into like Robinson Street, and it's basically, if you're heading south on I-35, like going to an OU football game, it's really kind of the last undeveloped stretch along Interstate 35. So most of this land is owned by the OU Foundation, and the OU Foundation is the entity that hired this consulting group that produced all these images of what this is going to look like and came up with this whole idea. One of our reporters kind of called it, "Hey, it's Bricktown without the canal." And it's taken us years and years and years to get developed Bricktown to the level it is now. And this is something that would be a very long-term project. But you also have city officials, you have university officials, you have foundation officials, you have regents, others who say, "We think this is a great idea." And oftentimes, when we see these kind of projects on the business desk, by the time you see these images and there's a consultant that's been hired, and these consultants aren't cheap, somewhere there is a developer who's interested. We know there's interest in doing this. So it remains to be seen who that's going to be, how much money they're going to have to bring to the table, how much public money it's going to take, because it is going to take some public money to get this done.
Well, and of course, Norman's a different development environment than Bricktown as well. I mean, there's a lot more demand probably in a high density residential area like Norman than there would be in a Bricktown type kind of development. But
right, but you do have the city of Norman has already done something that we see often here in Oklahoma City, where they've developed a tax increment financing district where taxes that are paid in that district can stay there, and it helps with the development costs, and then the money's repaid later from the increased taxes that accrue from that development. So that's a kind of function that we've seen happen before with these kinds of developments.
So, Nolen, will you miss Lloyd Noble?
No.
Ryan?
It's a good arena for what it is, and it's not going anywhere. I think when Barry talked to Joe Castiglione, I think they got the idea that it'll still be there, and they'll use it for practices and things like that. I mean, this arena would be several miles from campus on the north side of Norman, so it'd be a much different atmosphere. But the renderings that were presented to us show a pretty festive game day atmosphere and kind of a plaza entryway into the arena where they could host things like game day, and also in addition to OU, they're pushing the idea of having Norman North high school games at this new arena, as well as NCAA events and other things.
Which would be really interesting because that would put them in direct competition with the city of Oklahoma City and the Chesapeake Arena, where they try to get things like NCAA tournament games. They haven't had much success lately. We've had stories about that. But you would have Norman and Oklahoma City competing against one another to get NCAA level events.
And it would depend on the event too. The arena was proposed at 10,000 seats, I think.
Right.
And I think the Chesapeake holds right around 13, a little more than 13, I think. And so it depends on the size of the event and what they're having. But it'll be interesting to see how those bids work and who's working together. Typically for events in Oklahoma City, the University of Oklahoma has been a sponsor for these NCAA events in Oklahoma City. Well, now that you've got a university-backed development, it'll be interesting to see who kind of steps up to help try to sponsor some events here in Oklahoma City.
Greatest player to play in Lloyd Noble? Sooner.
Gosh, you know, I'm a big fan of Wayman Tisdale because that was my era.
That's
How
the
about
correct
Alvin
answer.
Adams? Was that pre?
Alvin was before my time, but
was
Alvin
that
was.
would he even be pre-Lloyd Noble?
No, he was actually the guy who built Lloyd Noble. I believe the first year it was open was Alvin Adams was there, and Alvin Adams was a great player.
Yes, he was.
And had a better NBA career than Wayman did.
That's also true.
Yeah, both great players. Both great players. Anyway.
Mookie Blaylock?
Mookie was fantastic.
Oh, I don't think you picked Mookie over Wayman.
I wouldn't. Mookie was probably more fun to watch.
Okay, all right, there you have it. The Cats should have a good basketball team this year, but we'll talk
great.
about that next week maybe. That's the kind of news you get here. We're online 24/7, 7 days a week on your porch or in your driveway. Pick it up. We think you'll like what you see. We'll see you next week.